Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of the Disgustingly Resilient podcast. Today we're making another small episode of the Death Guard Fundamentals, and this is going to be an Understanding Mortarion. So it's going to be quite a short one compared to what you're used to, and it's basically to do with the recent changes we've seen that have come out in the recent data slate to the rules commentary, and why Mortarion is now going to be a lot more valid again. But it's really, I got a request from someone to sort of kind of make a video to clarify what Mortarion's aura actually does, what it affects and what it doesn't. So that's what we're going to cover today. So it's going to be quite a quick one, talking specifically about Mortarion, what makes him so unique and why it's such a good change that's happened with the data slate for us. So without going into it too much, let's carry on. So first of all, Mortarion, who is he? So he's our Primarch, he's our big centerpiece model, he's cheap, about 325 points. He's a build around model, which means you can build entire army lists around this fella. He basically brings a unique aspect to the army, to the game, which is quite cool, especially for Death Guard. It's very unique to us. It offers us unique army advantages that not every army can access, and this gives us a different approach to the game that people aren't going to be prepared for, because if only Death Guard, for example, can bring this ability to the game, which we're going to go into, which is to ignore modifiers, army-wide anyway. A lot of armies do have access to his rule, but it's usually limited to a single unit. Whereas Mortarion has it as an aura, and people won't be prepared and won't be as versed in playing against such abilities and such effects. So it's a good way to catch people out and offer, like I say, a different challenge for people to try and overcome. Whereas for us, it's a great advantage for us to have because we can rely on that advantage against their opponent. Recently, the data slate changes have made Mortarion almost auto take, but I think the index, is in such a good place at the moment that he's both auto take and not auto take. I think you can still run Mortulus, but I think now bringing Morty again is fantastic. And basically, it's kind of opened up even more builds than we already had, and I'm super excited. I'm going to be trying out Mortarion again. I'm really excited to get back on the table because I'll say the phrase Mortarion has been unleashed again, because basically this is the ability that he had at the start of the edition, how we all thought it did play. Then some places and some tournaments ruled it separately, which caused the whole debacle. But now we've had it clarified and we're back to where we are, which we're going to get into, don't worry. But yeah, the Lord of the Death Guard is the one thing, is the rule on his page that makes Mortarion Mortarion. So what is Lord of the Death Guard? So Lord of the Death Guard is an aura. So we've got obviously Mortarion's data sheet here. We're not going to look into it too much. But the main thing we'll look at today is the Lord of the Death Guard aura, which is while a friendly Death Guard unit is within 6 inches of this model, that unit can ignore any on or all modifiers to its characteristics, any roll or test that is made for it, excluding modifiers to saving throws. So what this basically means is Morty becomes the ultimate no machine. Opponent wants to use -1 to hit, nope, you ignore it. Opponent wants to use damage reduction, nope, you ignore it. Shooting indirect, getting the -1 to hit penalty, nope. Is someone trying to slow you and your army down? Nope. Mortarion becomes the ultimate answer to most debuffs in the game and most modifiers. Basically, you can just laugh at, and that's such a unique thing, especially how it's an aura, because it means if you build around Mortarion and play around him in close proximity, you can basically negate most of your opponent's defensives, which is pretty funny. And this is all on top of the rest that he brings to the table, which is a very tough model with 3 auras to pick from, of which two now are very good. Extending contagion range with the new contagions is fantastic, and rerolling 1s to wound is kind of your default pick, because that's just going to give your army extra efficiency. Now, don't get me wrong, Mortarion is not the most powerful combatant in combat. His attacks are kind of meager. Only 5 of them, wish it was 7, but he's still good enough to punch any tank that comes near him. Just try and avoid those 4+ invulnerables. But the topic today isn't Mortarion and how to use him as such. It's all about that Lord of the Death Guard. So we can clarify to the listeners what you can ignore, what you can't ignore, and what it actually means for the army. So this was the recent change that happened. So as I said, people weren't sure that when you ignored modifiers, what it actually meant. Because if we go back for a second, just look at Morty, people would argue that only this top row here, where his name is a characteristic. Other people would argue his characteristic is his entire data sheet, so his weapons, his damage, his AP, etc. And because there was no clear answer from GW, we got into a situation where some tournaments would say it's only the top line, which for the UK has been a while in the way it's been played for a while now. And then you had tournaments like LVO who ruled it the other way, where all of this couldn't be affected down here. GW themselves have now come out with this clarification, which can be found in the Warhammer 40,000 website, downloads, rules commentary on page 19. So if anyone wants to call you out on it, pull it up. So what they have stated is, when ability allows you to ignore modifiers to a unit or model's characteristics, unless stated otherwise, this allows you to ignore modifiers to the following: move, toughness, save, wounds, leadership, and objective control for the models. So that's the top row. So that's what some talk saying, that's all it ignores. That is the top row of stats. However, it expands on that. Range, attacks, ballistic skill, weapon skill, strength, armor penetration, and damage. So this has actually extended upon that initial read and said that all the stats that are actually part here in the weapon can't be affected either. You can ignore any modifiers to these as well. This is huge. It's so powerful because it means people can't reduce your damage, they can't reduce your AP, your attacks, your weapon skill, ballistic skill. Now it carries on to say, it also allows you to ignore modifiers to rolls or tests, which Mortarion does. This allows you to ignore modifiers to all rolls and tests for those models and their attacks. For example, advanced rolls. So if someone gives you -2 to advance, you can ignore it. Hit rolls, wound rolls. Because one thing we're going to draw a clarification for in a second is a roll and a characteristic are not the same, but Mortarion does allow you to ignore both of those. They are separate, but Mortarion does allow you to ignore both, which is very good. And the last thing is, when a rule states you can ignore any or all modifiers to the characteristic or role, you can choose to ignore all the modifiers. So basically, it's a choice. So if say you're an example where you're actually trying to wrap a rhino and you don't want to kill it, and something's giving you -1 to hit, but you're near Mortarion, you can choose to actively take the -1 to hit because you want to, not kill the rhino or whatnot. So it is an option for us. You don't have to ignore it. So let's very quickly distinguish the difference between a characteristic and a role. So a characteristic is a set value on the datasheet. That is when you pull up your datasheet for your character or your unit or whatever it is, everything on that datasheet is a characteristic. This includes weapon skill, ballistic skill, damage, AP, movement, etc. Now, roles are not characteristics. A role is like when you roll to hit, that is not a characteristic. Your role draws upon your characteristic for its initial result that it requires. So you look at your characteristic weapon skill 3, and that tells you your roll needs to be weapon skill 3. But if the opponent has something like -1 to hit rolls, that is modifying the hit roll and not the weapon skill characteristic. This is why we're able to stack -2 to hit with our weapon skill modifying contagion, and then something like Nurglings for negative to hit, because you're modifying two separate things, not the same thing twice. But Mortarion does allow us to ignore modifiers to both characteristics and rolls. So this means you can ignore both any weapon skill, ballistic skill modifiers, but also any roll modifiers, such as -1 to hit rolls. Now, Mortarion has one caveat, which is excluding saving throws. But he does allow you to ignore characteristics changes to saves. So if you came into the mirror match and I picked -1 save and you had Mortarion, I actually can't modify your save characteristic because I'm modifying your characteristic. And Mortarion lets you ignore that. The one thing Mortarion can't ignore is modifiers to saving throws, which is the actual roll for your armor. So any modifiers to that roll when you make your armor save, which armor penetration is, you can't ignore. So you can't be on a 2-up save permanently. AP modifies the saving throw, not the saving characteristic. So that's why that doesn't work, okay? So let's clarify that first. So what can Mortarion actually ignore? So, as we covered, stat line modifiers. So this is movement, toughness, etc. Leadership can't be brought down. Your movement can't be lowered. So you're getting hit by Basilisk, which is giving you -2 to move. You can ignore it. If you're in Death Guard Mirror, you can't have your toughness reduced. If anything's got leadership reducing, like demons, they can't reduce that. So you can ignore all the stat line modifiers. Any advance and charge roll, because although this isn't a characteristic, an advance and a charge roll is a roll, not a characteristic. Mortarion again states we can ignore modifiers to any test or roll made. So you can ignore, again, if the basilisk hit you, it gives you -2 to move, advance, and charge. So you can ignore the characteristic modifier, -2. You can ignore the advance, -2, and you can ignore the charge, -2, because they're all covered. The movement modifier is covered by the characteristic ignore, and the advance and charge roll is covered by ignoring modifiers to rolls. Okay? You can also ignore any modifiers to leadership tests. So this is important when taking stuff like battle shock tests. So if a Tyranid player tries to do his once per game army-wide battle shock at -2 because he's got Hive Tyrant, Enduro Tyrant, or whatever it is, you can ignore the minus to your leadership when taking that test, which is nice. Interestingly as well, if you do fail that battle shock test, if you're near Mortarion, you do not lose objective control. Your OC is not set to 0 as that is a modifier, but you will still count as being battle shocked. So any bonuses the opponent gets for you being battle shocked still apply. You still can't use stratagems. It's just your objective control characteristic cannot be lowered. So it's quite cool. You can get, battle shocked on an objective and still hold it because you guys are going to keep all their OC because Morty's nearby. So that's quite a cool, unique thing. You can also ignore, this is the funniest one, Mortarion on his datasheet has a rule that says if Mortarion is under 6 wounds or 7 wounds, he is -1 to all his hit rolls. But Mortarion ignores modifiers, so he can ignore his own wounded bracketing penalty. So it's kind of pointless it being on there, but it's the same for any other vehicle. So Plague Burst crawls on low wounds, you can ignore that. All these things are modifiers to hit rolls and can be ignored. You can also ignore weapon and ballistic skill modifiers. So again, in the mirror, if you have the contagion, some other units have abilities that reduce ballistic skill and weapon skill. You can ignore all of that. You can ignore hit and wound roll modifiers. So if someone, has a stratagem for -1 to hit a unit, you can ignore it. You're against, let's say, a half guard for Votan who have -1 to your wound roll. If your strength's higher than them, you can ignore that because it's a roll modifier and Mortarion allows you to ignore that. You can ignore AP modifiers, but only for our attacks into the enemy. We'll clarify that in a second. But if you are attacking an enemy and they pop Armor of Contempt, is a very popular one for Space Marines, normally that would reduce your AP by 1. So if you had an AP2 Death Shroud Scythe and you swung in and they played Armor of Contempt, normally that would drop you down to AP1. However, Mortarion around, you can ignore that AP modifier, which means your opponent's probably not going to bother using the stratagem in the first place, but it does effectively mean that you can't have your AP reduced and you will be striking at AP2 or 3 technically with a contagion, which is really good. You also get to ignore any damage reduction and damage halving. So different units like Deathwing Knights have the ability to subtract 1 from the damage roll or damage characteristic. So Redemptor Dreadnoughts have the same ability. You can ignore that. So this really helps on 2 damage weapons because you literally, rather than getting your damage halved, you're just ignoring that and keeping it full damage. So you literally save yourself from a 50% damage reduction, which is massive. This also applies to anything that halves damage. So if a Catan, for example, which you get used to seeing them fucking things, if a Catan tries to halve your damage, you can ignore that. Because again, it is modifying your damage characteristic on your datasheet. And if someone says, oh, but it's a D6 damage, so technically that's a damage roll, Mortarion once again allows you to ignore modifiers to rolls as well. So you can ignore that as well. So you can't stop us dealing the damage. We're going to hurt you. And another one you get to ignore is if a unit or a model has a rule that says once per game you can set the damage of an attack to 0. That is clarified as being a modifier. So even though people think, oh, but it's just a flat out replacement, you are still modifying the original number. So guess what? Once again, oh, I'm gonna ignore that 7 damage entropy cannon you landed. I'm gonna set it to 0. Nope. Mortarion stood right there, but that entropy cannon is hitting and it's hitting hard. So that's really good. So what can we not ignore? So a common one people think is that we can ignore cover with this. That's not the case. Cover is not a modifier to our AP or our damage or our stats or of any form. It is a bonus, a buff to our opponent's armor save. And we don't get to ignore modifiers that affect our opponent, only if they affect our rolls and our units. So they can still get cover. Enemy units gaining abilities like +1 to hit and wound. Again, it's affecting the enemy model, the enemy unit. Even though those attacks are swinging at us, the modifiers themselves are to our opponent's rolls and not our rolls. Therefore, we can't ignore them. Enemy AP. So this technically does modify our roll, but Mortarion has a caveat that you cannot ignore modifiers to saving throws. The saving throw is the roll you make as you make a save. This is the one caveat he has, and it's because if he didn't have this caveat, you could have an army of 2+ invulnerable Terminators and Mortarion. And that's not quite balanced, I'm not going to lie. It'd be funny, but it's not balanced. You also can't ignore Feel No Pain. Feel No Pain is not a modifier in any sense of the word. It doesn't change characteristics. There's nothing to do with rolls. It is simply, I mean, you make a roll, but it's nothing to do with our rolls. It is simply a separate ability. It has no impact on that at all. If your opponent has Feel No Pain, they are going to get Feel No Pain. And also, any enemy bonuses to their save and invulnerables, they're going to get them as well. So if they have aggressors who get +1 save versus damage 1, they're still going to get that. Because again, it's modifying the opponent's unit and rolls and not ours. Therefore, we can't ignore it. So just a few examples real quickly, so you can kind of get your head around it. We have a Plague Burst Crawler firing indirect into 5 intercessors. We can ignore the -1 to hit penalty for firing indirect, as that is modifying our hit roll. So if they're stood near Mortarion, you're still hitting on freeze with indirect, which is really nice. But you can't ignore the fact that the intercessors are going to get cover, because that's modifying the enemy's model save, and we can't ignore modifiers to their units, only to our characteristics and our rolls, not theirs. Okay? Death Shroud meleeing into a Redemptor who's already used Armor of Contempt strat. This one's a pure win for us. We're going to ignore the AP reduction from Armor of Contempt because that modifies our AP characteristic, which we can ignore. And we can also ignore the -1 damage because that's trying to modify our damage characteristic, which once again, Mortarion can ignore. And then the last example, a 5 wound Mortarion fighting a Catan. So Mortarion can ignore the hit penalty for being on low wounds because that is a hit roll penalty and we can choose to ignore that. We're going to ignore the halve damage ability that Catan have because that's modifying our damage characteristic, so we can choose to ignore that. But what we can't ignore is the Catan's Feel No Pain because once again, that is an opponent making the roll and there's no modifiers to that. It's his ability, you can't ignore that. Okay? Think of it like this. This is the easiest way to think about it with Mortarion. If it affects our unit's rolls and characteristics, you can ignore it. So if it's affecting our hit wound, our hit roll, our wound roll, you can ignore it. But if it's affecting the opponent's unit's rolls and characteristics, you can't ignore it. So if they've got +1 to hit, you can't ignore it. If it's +1 to wound, you can't ignore it. If they've got +1 toughness, +1 strength, etc., you can't ignore it because it's not affecting our models and our rolls. It's affecting the opponent's models and the opponent's rolls. And the exception for this is saving throws, as we've said. Sorry, you're not having that 2-up invulnerable, even though you really want it. So, as a quick summary, hope this has helped sort of clarify some uses for this ability. It's the ultimate defensive denial to our opponents. It allows you to maximize our units and maximize the damage output. You don't have to worry about 2 damage becoming super inefficient into Redemptors or Deathwing Knights. You just get to laugh at it and completely go through it. If people want to make unkillable Death Stars or on -1 AP, on -1 damage, on -1 to hit and wound, you just go, that was cute. Thanks for explaining that for 20 minutes. I don't give a shit. I'm going to swing at you, which is really cool. And again, it's really unique. It gives that unique army identity of being the army that strips away all your protection. All your defenses are gone. What you thought was safe is not safe. And that's really important because you're going to punish people for durability. And people play with ideas in their head of how durable a unit can be on the battlefield, and they will play with that unit accordingly. And you suddenly tell them, that's not the case, buddy. If I want to kill that unit, I'm going to kill that unit. And people are then open to making mistakes or being too cautious because they're too scared. So it's really unique to have to play against a force multiplier like Mortarion. He also allows us to still do indirect skew. Because of him allowing our indirect to be more powerful than normal, and indirect at the moment has all had its points go up. So indirect is kind of out of the meta, maybe, we'll see. But if it is, people are going to not be preparing for indirect as much. You might see less rhinos, more open infantry. And then you come along and actually double down on the indirect because of Mortarion. And you're going to really punish people. And especially when they're not expecting an indirect meta, you show up with triple Plague Burst Crawler and start punishing everyone because you've got Mortarion to ignore the hit penalty. Then you bring a Lord of Virulence as well. So now they're hitting on 2s out of line of sight and ignoring cover because of the Lord of Virulence. Now you're really cooking. But that's the power that Mortarion can bring, and the real fun way to play an army with Mortarion to maximise that. It's such a different experience playing with Mortarion and playing without Mortarion. And again, remember, there's no right or wrong. Both are good builds at the moment. I'm testing out both. And the golden rule is obviously the golden rule. If you want to play with Mortarion, you think he's the coolest model, rock him. He's going to be real good at the moment. He's really good. But again, if you're a person like I used to be, where I didn't really like Primarchs, I'm more of a Typhus man, then you don't have to take him, and you can just use the points on more models and more units. There's no right or wrong answer. Both work and both are fantastic. So yeah, I hope this little video clarified up what Mortarion does let you ignore. The reasons we kind of bring him is just against AAA defenses mainly, and I hope you enjoyed this little video. Obviously it's shorter than normal, only 20 odd minutes, but I thought it was important to get out of there, especially with the data slate coming out and making Mortarion probably going to be a lot more taken, a lot more useful, which is really good. It opens up list variety and list builds, and I'm super excited. But I do have another faction fundamentals coming out, covering the shooting phase, decision making in the shooting phase, prioritization of targets, sequencing, etc. So you can look forward to that one coming up soon. I am at the ITT International Team Tournament this weekend. I got a very good round 1 pairing against Team England, so that's going to be fun. But we'll see how it goes. I'm just going to have some fun and try and enjoy myself. And yeah, let's get excited for a new meta, new year, new meta, I suppose. And yeah, everyone, thank you very much for watching. Thank you to my YouTube members who support the channel. If you want to become a Plague Marine, check out below. You get access to Discord, vote upcoming content. Discord's really alive at the moment. Everyone talking, everyone excited, obviously, because of the new rules. Nurgle's Mansion Discord. Again, another Nurgle Discord. Always great to chat in there and sort of get people's opinions. And my own Discord, the Disgustingly Resilient Discord. Everyone right in there at the moment. It's been great. Private pictures to use on these videos, etc. And also just nice to chat and exchange lists and sort of see what everyone's building, etc. But yeah, for now, everyone, thank you very much. I'll catch you on the next one, and stay right on, everyone. Catch you later.